Hello, everybody. Welcome to yet another talk, Architecture Talk Time with Sarah Colata. I am reunited today again with Jeff Echols. Really excited because Jeff was on my first podcast, and now we're about 11 podcasts in, and Jeff has joined me again.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks for having me back. And I really appreciate everything that you're putting into this. So it's my pleasure to come back and continue the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So really today, I invited you because you're the absolute expert if it comes to branding, especially with architecture. You worked in this industry for a really long time, and you're a very active member of the community, helping through your presence in all the digital realms and Facebook groups and podcasts and with your lives as well, answer a lot of questions and concerns in respect of building a brand and why is it important and what is it. So I was really interested to invite you to have this conversation in more detail, going into the topic of branding. So maybe let's start by you introducing yourself properly once more. So just in case anybody hasn't seen the first podcast with you, they'll know who you are.
So my name is Jeff Echols. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the United States, and I play several roles. First is I'm president of EchoEngagement, which is my consultancy for professional services firms, a lot of those being architects, engineers, attorneys, and others. I also host the Build Your Brand podcast that can be found on Gābl Media or wherever you consume podcasts. And then I'm part of the Architect team, where I host a number of live Facebook Live events and other conversations. And so really I concentrate on branding, on marketing, those things. But my mission is really to change the way that people do business. Professional services firms, the way architects do business, by helping them understand that if they speak from a point of empathy rather than a point of ego, their clients and their employees will see value rather than commodity.
And that is so very interesting because I feel and I think that it's not it's not going to offend anybody if I say that indeed an architecture industry is quite ego driven, and it's understandable with the with how hard it is to accomplish all the studies and also the grandness of things that we're dealing with as designers. And I have definitely many times in my walk and through my career collaboration, I meet people that start conversations and discussions from that point of of ego, and it's much harder to connect, indeed. So it has importance in respect of seeing each other as human beings, and then obviously to build trust as well for business.
Yeah, I mean it's so first of all, you're right. I mean it's completely natural, I think. And we won't just throw architects under the bus. Let's spread it out overall of professional services. But if you think about an architect or an engineer or an attorney or an accountant, and like you said, all of the schooling that you've had, the degrees that you have, the licenses that you carry, these professionals are the bona fide experts in whatever it is that they do. So it's natural, I think, for someone to come from a point of ego. This is what I know. This is my experience. These are my qualifications. These are the things that I know to be important. But, when we come from that point of view, what happens in the brain of the audience, whoever the audience is, if it's a person that you're interviewing with for a new project or whatever that is, their neuroscience tells us that their brain is processing all of the information, number one, very quickly, but I like to say they process it through a lens that says, what's in it for me? Your brain is in your head to help you survive, to keep you alive. And so whenever I say something or whenever you say something, the first thing that goes through the other person's brain is this a danger to me? Will this help me survive? Will this help me thrive? And so if an architect starts out talking about, well, we're an award-winning firm with offices all over Europe, what goes through my brain? What goes through my brain is none of that matters in terms of my survival or helping me thrive. What in the world does that have to do with me? And so my inclination based on the neuroscience, based on the way that my brain works, is just to turn that off. That sounds just like every other architect that says we're award winning, or these are our accomplishments, or these are where our offices are, or whatever. You start to sound just like everybody else because you start from that point that doesn't matter to me. And if you can flip that around to starting from a point of empathy, now you can start to talk about the things that matter to me. Don't assume, learn, develop that empathy. But if you can start from that point, you start from a point of alignment with my brain. And now all of a sudden you're much more relevant to me because you're talking about the things that matter to me and my survival and my ability to thrive, for my business to succeed or my family to be happy if we're designing, if we're talking about residential architecture. And so that's the real key there. If you want to be relevant, and a lot of architects will say, well, how in the world could an architect not be relevant? I get to be the judge. I get to be the judge whether or not you're relevant to me. The architect, again, that's coming from a point of ego when you say that. The architect doesn't get to judge the relevance or the value that they actually bring to the table. It's the client, it's the other person that judges whether or not you're relevant or whether you're delivering value.
Absolutely right. And I really like the fact that you're talking about this openly, because I think that there are certain things, and I kind of understand where it comes from within architecture. I think, again, it's very much about how we present ourselves to one another within the community of architects. We like to mention, first of all, which schools we finished, because it almost is like the family you belong to, and which school of thought you represent, right? And then where you've got your experience from. So, whether you went to work with Zaha Hadid or another architect, you always mention. But I think that from a perspective of a client who might not have all this background, that's number one. And two, also may not have the interests that you have within your industry, and just complete zero of a point of relatability to all this information that you're sharing in terms of awards or your walks of life and career. I think it can be really overwhelming, and it's good to realize that, because spinning back to the concept of branding, and I would like you to explain a little bit more why that matters when we speak about branding. But it is a very important point where I almost feel like everything originates from, right? Because your message is everything.
Yeah, it really is. And it's important to remember, number one, when we go back to where we start the conversation from, ego or empathy, what matters, what's relevant, why architects are commoditized. Many architects would say, yeah, we're treated like a commodity. When we start talking about those things that you just mentioned, hey, I worked with Zaha, or I graduated from this school, or whatever. Again, those are things that we think matters, and they matter to us because we understand the industry. They matter to us, like you said, we're part of the family of the school that we graduated from, or the people that that subscribe to a certain style or like a certain style. So we understand the industry and we understand what all of those things mean. Our clients in general do not, or at least not on the level that we do. And so what happens is they look out, and 99% of what we think matters, again, my degrees, my licenses, my experience with Zaha, whatever the case is, 99% of what we think matters is just the point of entry into the conversation from their point of view. They already assume that you're an expert. They already assume that you have great experience in all of these things. So when we come from that point of view, it really doesn't matter. because they've already assumed. And so when they look at these 5 architects as their short list, and you say, well, how in the world do they think that that firm is as qualified as we are? Why do they think that all 5 of these firms on the short list are equal? It's because they don't know. They look out and they go, well, they're architects and they do this kind of work and they do this. And so these are the 5 that we're going to talk to. And so then, you know, you talk about branding and our message. And I started out, it's either in the preview or the first episode of the Build Your Brand podcast. I start out by saying, I understand that there are a lot of architects that may say, we don't even need a brand. Why would I want a brand? You know, do I have a brand? And one of my favorite quotes about branding, and I think it's probably one of the most important quotes in maybe the last 10 years about branding. It comes from Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon. He says, your brand is what other people say about you when you're not in the room. And I think architects really need to let that quote sink in, because there's an idea that every architecture firm will espouse, and they say something along the lines of 80% of our work comes from repeat clients and referrals. And so you think about that and say, okay, well, that means that we need all of our clients to either come back for their next project, if they, you know, if it's someone that does more than one project in their lifetime, and or we need those people, those clients, to tell other people about us. That ties directly to Jeff Bezos' quote. And so if we say, well, we don't have a brand, why would we need a brand? Well, it's because someone's talking about you. It's your clients, they're talking about you, your employees. You know, one of the things that we probably won't get into that much in this conversation, but that I'm asked to speak on sometimes, is the employer brand, right? The idea that we have a brand with employees, the ones that we need to retain and the ones that we need to recruit. So no matter what type of brand we're talking about or what channel of our brand we're talking about, there are people out there talking about us. And if we don't give them the message to say, if we don't give them the flag to carry on our behalf, then what are they out there saying, right? What are those past clients saying about you when they talk to their friends or colleagues, that may be that next great ideal client for you? And so that's really the importance of understanding, number one, that you have a brand, and then, you know, how do we develop our brand beyond that point? Okay, people are going to talk about us. So what experience are we giving them? What words are we giving them? What story are we giving them to tell on our behalf?
And that almost is like a psychological question, because I feel like at some level in life we answer that to ourselves. But it does matter if you take that to the scale of a business. And, you know, when I was in practice, back in the day when I had my own architecture practice, and I remember that every single time when we spoke about other service providers within the design industry around the area where I work, we talked about their personal characteristics. Oh, that person is very reliable. That isn't, you know, because it's, yeah, human brain wants to analyze that way. But at the end of the day, if it's not a business or there isn't a story, they judge you as a person.
Oh yeah.
So how do you manipulate that? Well, in the good sense of the word, manipulate it, so that it can go the way you prefer it to go, rather than in any way, you know, that it could go. Because we still make mistakes, of course, but how can the concept of a brand and something consciously created outweigh the negative in some respect as well?
Yeah, I think, you know, you'll notice, you already know this, but someone that's listening will notice that I'll always come back to the idea of empathy, because, you know, our brand as we create it has to be something that matters to our clients, right? And one of the things that bothers me a lot, when I hear someone talking about a rebrand of their firm, or a branding agency talking about developing a brand, many times they'll talk about the culture of our firm, and they'll talk about our strengths and all of these things. But if we take a step back and we look at the biggest, the best known, the best loved brands in the world, and this is really what we do in the Build Your Brand podcast, is we take a big beloved brand and we analyze that, and try to look for the lessons that architects can learn from that brand. But if you take any big brand, if you take Southwest Airlines, and they'll talk about their purpose statement being giving people the freedom to fly. If we talk about Walmart, and I apologize, many of these will be American brands, but if we talk about Walmart, they'll talk about helping people save money so that they can live better lives, to cross the pond, so to speak. If we talk about, or if we look at BMW, they'll talk about giving people the ultimate driving experience as their purpose and their brand. And you'll notice in all three of those examples, three of the best brands in the history of brands in the world, if you look at those three, and there are many more, of course, but if you look at those three, not a single one of those purpose statements was about the company itself. All of those purpose statements were about their clients, their customers, and serving those customers or clients. And so when an architecture firm, as a for instance, goes through a rebrand and says, oh yeah, we spent a year and a half going through our rebrand and looking at the culture of our firm and all of these things, those things are certainly important. But the question is, what happens if you go through all of this effort and you spend maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, by the time you've rolled in business cards and web design and all of these things? What happens when you go through that entire effort and it turns out that your ideal client doesn't care, right? What if they don't care about your culture and your ping pong table and your kegerator and your 4-day work weeks and all of these things? Because your brand, and again, we can look at it on different fronts. We can look at it in terms of our corporate brand and our relationship with our ideal client. And we can also look at it in terms of our employer brand, where that culture and those things may play very, very strongly into that relationship. But our brand has to move the needle, right? It's how people identify us. It's how people understand us. It's how people remember us. It's the thing that's based on the purpose that guides everything that we do. And so at the end of the day, if we need more clients, and everybody does, because we've got to feed the machine, right? We've got to keep this thing going. So at the end of the day, if we need more clients, our brand has to be about our customers or our clients. Our brand has to matter to those people. And when we say 80% of our work comes from repeat clients and referrals, our brand really has to matter to those ideal clients and those ideal clients that we want to help us find more ideal clients like them.
So an important question here is, how do you ever distinguish like who is your ideal client? And because at the end of the day, I think you have to ask yourself that question. I think that you're very right. There is a completely like two very separate points of perspective. One is of a person that's in it and building that culture and doing the business, and it's getting obsessed about the new 3D printing technology they're using in order to create model making. And then there is a client who may really have zero interest in it. All they want is an experience of a building that they can live happily ever after in with their family, for example. And then again, you know, being in this industry, I remember times where I met clients. I would always tell myself, I don't want to work with these kind of people. Just no. But it's something to do with personality, but also with the way they value you, so that you can actually work on these terms that you think, you can get up in the morning and do it. So how do you even start, to define it? Of course, it's by bad experiences, but what else is there to look into to be able to consciously define who is my ideal client?
Yeah, that you said it right at the beginning of that question. You said it's a very important question, and it really is. To me, it is the important question, and unfortunately, it's the question that most architects, and again, not to throw architects under the bus, I think most of this goes all the way through professional services to attorneys and engineers and accountants and everyone, because we're educated and we're trained to focus on specific things. And so what architects most often do is they define their ideal project type. I'm a residential architect, or we design museums, or something like that, right? And they don't think about, maybe not at all, or at least not enough about who is their ideal client. And the example that I use sometimes, because I'm doing some work with a firm that designs a lot of fire stations, for instance, as an example. And so if the client on a fire station project is the fire chief, the person that heads up that particular firehouse, that particular fire station, then we know that as human beings, not all fire chiefs are our ideal client, right? If we look at 10 fire chiefs, maybe 8 of them are people that we really enjoyed working with. Maybe 8 of them are people that really valued what we brought to the project, that really understood how working with us helped them realize the success that came through the design of their new fire station. And 2 of them were people that we'd never want to work with again, because of their personalities, because of their attitude towards the process, whatever the reasons are, to get to your point. And so I think, what happens in marketing world and in marketing speak is we develop personas or avatars about who an ideal client is. And most of the time, those are generalizations about demographics, really. It's maybe Jerry is a 45-year-old corporate executive who runs a company of $100 million and has 230 employees. And when Jerry goes home to his luxury apartment in Manhattan, he has a wife and 2 kids and a dog. And that's the way that we build those personas. And where I like to veer off of that path is, number one, I don't care about Jerry. Jerry is a gross generalization of someone we might want to work with. We can use that as a tool, but we need to get to the point where we're talking about a real live human being. And we need, in my opinion, we want to find a person that we enjoy working with, that we do our best work for. I also think we need to find someone that we do work that makes us the most profitable, right? I think that needs to be part of the equation. And so the flip side of that is someone that enjoys working with us, someone that values us, someone that sees the value and is willing to pay us what we're worth, someone that is engaged with the process that we go through. And so I think there's a lot of factors, and some of those, obviously different firm leaders will need to work out for themselves, because, a fire chief is different than a homeowner, right? There's all these different variables that are involved there. But I always want to boil it down to a real life human being. So I can say, Sarah is my ideal client, and here's why. And here's what I know about Sarah. And I want to learn as much as possible about Sarah, the real life human being, so that I can understand, where Sarah goes and what she reads and, the events she goes to and the people she talks to, because I want to find as many Sarahs as possible. reality will tell us that even when we start focusing on our ideal client, that we will have clients over the course of our career who are not ideal. That's just reality. But from this day forward, from the day that we define that ideal client forward, we are not going to pursue anyone that is not an ideal client. We are not going to pursue anyone that's not ideal for us. And so when we wrap that back around to branding, and you asked this as part of the question earlier, about the 3D printing and everything else like that, the things that matter to us, the technology and the research and those things that we do. Well, if we think about building a culture and a brand and aligning those things, if we were to say, this is our ideal client, Sarah is our ideal client, and here's why. Now the question becomes, as a professional service provider, which is what an architect is, as someone that serves a client, because if we're not serving a client is not paying us, right? We're getting paid to solve problems very creatively, very artistically many times. But at the end of the day, we're getting paid to solve a problem. So if I know that Sarah is my ideal client and my purpose is, in some way to serve Sarah and her needs, then how does our work with the 3D printer do that? How does our research on these topics do that? How do all of these things that we do and these things that we're interested in, how do all of these things serve Sarah? And that's how we can start to align that culture and that brand. And so when we develop a brand that's based on this, serving Sarah, then we can start to attract people that are really passionate about serving Sarah and her needs, about using this technology, about doing this research, about doing all of these things in order to provide the best solution for this particular ideal client. And that's where that alignment in culture and purpose and brand can come in.
One thing that comes to mind, and I'm wondering, is how do you basically end up defining or finding all those elements? Because I think that at the very beginning, it's kind of a combination between what you like or you would like to happen and some experiences that you already had. It's not like you always know it straight away.
Yeah.
And yet, from experience, I know that having your own brand is almost everything. Because it's your message, it's the values that you put forward, how you communicate with people, and all these elements that you talk about of understanding really your true client. But in the first place, how do you define or find that person?
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. And it is important to understand that when you take a look at those big brands and those beloved brands, the Southwests and the Walmarts and the BMWs and the others, that what we hear today, for instance, Southwest Airlines, that's the brand that we cover in the first season of Build Your Brand podcast. Their purpose statement, their brand is all about giving people the freedom to fly. That didn't come out from day one, right? That was developed and understood and realized over time. They had an idea, the problem they wanted to solve and who they wanted to solve it for, but they didn't solidify that brand and that message day one. It took some time for it to evolve and the realization to come out. And I think what you're saying is the same thing. I think when someone goes out on their own, they open their own firm, there's a problem that I like to solve. It's designing houses, or it's designing museums, or it's helping people plan these things, whatever that problem is. That happens a lot at the very beginning. This is how I like to do it. All those personal things that we bring to it, that's perfectly natural. And you're right, developing that brand is essential, and it will evolve over time, of course. But I think, before we started recording, we talked about social media a lot and those type things. Wherever you can go to engage those people that you want to serve. The homeowners, the fire chiefs, the museum curators, whoever they are, the best thing that you can do to build your specific brand is to go find those people and engage with them and develop empathy for them, develop a deep understanding. I call it radical empathy. If the museum curator is the person that you want to work with, you want to work for, you want to design for, how do you get into conversations, and as many conversations as possible, and find out what really matters to them, what problems they have that you can solve, and dig into those relationships and build your brand out of that. Because again, all the way back to the beginning, the Jeff Bezos quote, if you're having great conversations with museum curators and they're your ideal client, what are they going to be talking about? My gosh, Sarah is this architect that really understands, that really engages around what matters the most to us, and is really developing this expertise, all of those things that you want that museum curator to say about you, right? That's if someone is starting their firm today, that's exactly what I would say, is understand what problem you want to solve. And that will probably come from some expertise you've developed over your career, and go out and talk to people in that realm that have that problem. Have as many conversations as possible. Leave the ego, leave the expertise, leave all of that on the shelf, and just have conversations to gain a deeper understanding about them and their needs, and the problems that they have. And you're going to build a very valuable brand very quickly by showing up and being there all the time with those people.
So interesting, and I really believe that's true. I think that this aspect of actually calculating the learning process into it all, because one thing that I noticed, and I think maybe this is also where the obsession about how how we speak about architecture once we're at it comes from. It might be because straight after education, we go into internships and we do what the architects say to do, right? So
Right.
very rarely we meet the client. We just experience everything from the production line. So the design development, the development of the actual elements, drawings, and very rarely get the experience of meeting the client. And then after years of this, let's just say anywhere between 1 to 5, some people decide to start their own practice. And for many, it might be the first time they will actually meet the actual client. And so they, again, come at it from a perspective, oh, the office I worked at didn't do that right, or that's how I see it. So I'm, again, going to come out there and say, well, we're different because we're doing this. But how is that message relevant to your client is where the question is. And it's totally fine not to know it straight away. And from what I'm hearing as well, you say it's important to calculate the process of actually asking those questions over and over again as you're developing your business. So some kind of evaluation scheme to go back to it and say, well, we have our big mission now defined, right? We're building beautiful natural homes for our clients or whatever, to give them something, I guess, right? That's how you would define it.
Sure. Yep. Yeah.
Based on their needs. There we go. But exactly, like over time also revisiting those points and seeing how is your brand growing around those values and the relationship that you have with clients.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of what we've talked about, and a lot of what I talk about all the time, is really a mindset, right? The whole idea of ego versus empathy is somewhat unnatural, going back to, we're trained and we're the professionals and all this. And so changing our mindset to start from a point of empathy, and you just described the young architect's career perfectly, right? You graduate and you intern and you do these things. And so if you're someone that's just graduating from school, or you've just started your internship, a great way to practice this mindset, because yes, the reality is that you're going to sit there at a computer and build Revit models, or whatever it is that you do as an intern, and maybe not meet a client for years. But a way to develop the mindset is to say, okay, well, if I'm building this model, or I'm doing this drawing, obviously I'm doing it to communicate. I'm doing this to give the right information to a contractor or to a client if we haven't gotten to that point. But start to think about, if I'm developing a set of drawings or a model for a contractor to build this home, this beautiful natural home, what serves them the best? What information do they need to understand what we're doing here? And start to build that mindset even from an early point in your career. And it's almost like a muscle, right? We can develop that over time, and develop that empathetic mindset over time. I think that's a great practice to get into right at the very beginning.
Interesting, very interesting. I think that there's a lot to learn for everybody and practically in every industry, because it's at this level really where I think that if we utilize and learn how to analyze ourselves and also put the best foot forward with whatever we're doing, this is that capacity that will allow us also to grow our business and scale up. Because it's a certain way in which we make our decisions of how we want to show up and what value we want to give to people, as well as defining really who we want to work with and who not to. That really helps us grow a business. And so after everything, it all boils down to this very simple human things. Like, exactly like you say, ego versus empathy. Very beautiful. And, just to wrap it up, because I almost feel like, there is a really beautiful lesson in this, to understand that all those business strategies, marketing strategies, they're tools, but they're also mindsets that you need to develop and practice, like you say. In respect of branding, if someone feels that that maybe their message isn't understood correctly, and I'm literally thinking of my recent client that I've been working with, that they're quite a well-developed company, but somewhere in between the lines, they lost their message and they're not being understood correctly. So a lot of times they're having to waste their energy on explaining what they're doing rather than being understood for what they're doing. Where would you start, to redefine it? I know that it's very much about the messaging and the story, but it also comes with a lot of other elements, like company culture and relationships within the firms and the general definition of the goal. How would you go about this?
Well, I think there are a couple of facets there, obviously, but I think one of the things that you have to do, especially, you said their message isn't being understood. I issued a challenge to leaders of professional services firms a week or two ago, and I said, the thing that you need to do right now is to hire someone, and this will obviously take a certain scale of business, but you need to hire someone who spends all day, every day, talking to your clients, talking to your recent past clients, and maybe even talking to your prospects, and having those conversations and understanding them and understanding what their problems and their goals are. And the reason that I said that was because, number one, if you want to think about accelerating the growth and success and sustainability of a firm, that's the way to do it. Because what happens is, as this person is out there talking to these clients, they start to understand who the client is, what makes them ideal or not, what their problems are, how things are changing for them, which is really obviously timely for this as we've gone through this COVID-19 crisis, understanding how things are evolving for those clients. And what they can do is they can go to the marketing team if there's a specific marketing team and say, listen, the messaging really needs to address these things that these clients are talking about. That's the irony, right? If we talk to our clients, if we have those those conversations with those ideal clients, they'll tell you how to be relevant. They'll tell you what they want and what to need. Repeat their words back to them, right? That's what's important. And so if you have this person that's out there doing that, they can tell the marketing team, hey, this is how we need to change the messaging because they said this, that, and the other. Then if we have a business development team, say, hey, listen, I was talking to this client. I was talking to this client that we worked with 3 years ago, and they were talking about this thing. It's coming up. You're setting your business development team up for greater success because you have your ear to the ground through these conversations. And so I think that is a critically important approach. And again, I understand if you're one person, that's a different conversation. But starting there with that, I don't have a better phrase for it. I don't think, that developing that radical empathy and then developing our purpose or defining our purpose around that. Again, back to Southwest Airlines, it was all about the idea of giving people the freedom to fly, was looking at a big state in the United States, giant state, Texas, in terms of land mass. It's huge. Getting from Dallas to San Antonio to Houston and back to Dallas in a day, if you're a business person for meetings. If you're driving, there's no way to do that. It takes hours and hours and hours to drive from here to there, and there's no way you could complete that circuit in a day. And so that was the original concept, was how do we give people the freedom to do business between these three spots in Texas? Well, if we fly them, if we fly from here to there and there to there and there back to there, that became the seed for Southwest Airlines, which became our purpose, is to allow people to do business and allow, this was 1967, I guess, allow the businessman to be home for dinner is really where that came from, dinner with his family. So it makes him more successful as a business person. It makes him more successful as a family man. Sounds a little bit dated, obviously, at this point, but it allows him to kind of engage, in those family things that are important. And so now they start developing that purpose around that because they understand the struggles. They understand what's important. They understand the goals and the needs, and they start building an airline around that. And eventually every single decision they make about culture, about prices, about airports that they fly in and out of, about everything. I mean, they have this relentless focus on that purpose that develops that brand. And if an architect were to look at that and say, you know what, this is our ideal client, this is what really matters to them, this is what they really need, our purpose is to help them be more successful. And in my opinion, if you're an architect, especially designing commercial work, your goal has to be to make your client's business better. Your goal has to be to make your client more successful. Your goal isn't about the object. It's not about the building itself. That, of course, is what we design, but the result of that is what's valued. And if the result of that is making your client's business more efficient, more profitable, whatever it is that they need to accomplish, then your ideal client sees immense value in what you do. If you say the value is in the building, no, it's not. There are 1 million architects on the internet that can design that building. The question is, who is going to design that building with a focus, express intent of making that client's business better? And how are we developing a culture inside our firm that's focused on making our clients more successful. And I think that's how you pull it all together, is understand, I mean, just an incredibly deep understanding of that client, and how do we make every decision based on that understanding, and everything we do based on that understanding.
And it sounds to me like the real place to start is to start talking about this within your own practice, with your own team, and defining really those parameters to understand it on a deeper level also, and to come out to clients with completely new set of questions and intentions to understand them better. And I think this is a really good place to start.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, you definitely need, when you're starting your practice, or even a rebrand, or whatever the situation is, it's okay, well, you do have to start with, what are we good at, right?
Yeah.
What do we want to do? Do we want to design homes or fire stations or museums or whatever? You've got to start there and make those determinations. I think it's very valuable to say, hey, what problems are out there? And I think that's a great opportunity right now, as many things are changing, some in small ways, some in big ways, because of this pandemic that's swept across the world. So I think that's a great opportunity to say, what are new problems that need to be solved, that didn't exist 9, 10, 12, 14, 16 weeks ago. But whatever that conversation is, it's got to start with, what are we good at? What do we want to do? Because same thing, we say about social media. If you're going to start with social media, start with things that you like to do. If you're a photographer, take pictures and post things on Instagram or something like that, because it's got to be something you enjoy. It's got to be something you can sustain. And so it's the same conversation. If we see this new opportunity and it's designing for, I don't know, new power sources or something like that, but we have zero expertise and zero interest, then don't do that. Do something that you care about, and that you can apply yourself to for the next 20, 30, 40 years.
Exactly, because it's consistency as well that matters so much. Like we said in this conversation, you won't have all the answers straight away. It comes with experience and with revisiting those questions and asking them over and over again in order to define really your own personal answers in terms of how you want to read your business, your brand, and your team as well. Because branding very much is about the internal message too. So.
It definitely is. It's funny you say that, because I just recorded a video this morning. I haven't even edited it yet, but it's about leadership. And I in the video, I tie leadership back to story structure and storytelling. And some people think, well, what in the world? Why are you doing that? That doesn't make any sense. But if we think about storytelling, think about a movie or a book or something like that, there's the main character, who we might call the hero, but we'll call them the main character, and they need to accomplish something. And there's going to be trials and tribulations and struggles and plot twists and all those things on the way. And there's always a second character. It's the best friend or the guide or the mentor character. And leaders need to be that guide character or that mentor character. They can't be the hero of their own story. No one wants to follow the person that wants to be the hero of their own story. That person just becomes the braggart, right? They're bragging about how good they are, how qualified they are. They're the best at this, that, or the other. No one wants to follow that character. And so when we think about leadership, especially through a time of crisis like now, right? There's no one in the world that is looking for someone to come out and say, yes, this is going to be easy. We're going to get through this okay. No problem. Don't worry. We're good to go. No one in the world wants that or expects that, because they know it's not true. Mm. And so when you come out as an architect and say, hey, we have all the answers, no one's looking for that either. they're looking for someone to lead them through the process of discovery, lead them through the process of problem solving. They're not looking for someone that comes in with all the answers, right? If you come in with all the answers to my problem, then you don't know what my problem is. You've assumed that you do, but my problem is different because it's me. That's, that's my brain saying that. And so, whereas the leader can't be the hero of their own story, they just become a braggart at that point. If you come in and say, hey, we've got all the answers, I'm going, wait a minute, you haven't even heard the problem yet, right? And, the architect in their mind says, well, it's a museum, right? We've done 100 museums. Yeah, but you better pay attention to what your ideal client thinks about their museum.
True. Yeah, exactly. Wow, this was amazing, Jeff. I love how you explained it in such non-branding terms. You took this conversation to a whole new level, and I think that people should and will appreciate it, because at the end of the day, it's just set of really, really like sensitive topics that we need to define for ourselves, and also learn how to lead through them and with them, with the use of them, the way we tell stories, and the position we take. So it's great. Thank you so much for sharing all these beautiful insights into branding for architects. And I'm sure I'll see you soon on another podcast. We already have something planned, so
we do.
For all the viewers, watch out for Jeff joining soon.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for the conversation. I always enjoy these conversations.